Through these studies, Freud tried to understand what it means to wait on God. More so, how do you do it? I know what it's really like to want something, but how do I wait on God when I want it? I know what it's like to be afraid of something I anticipate, but how do I wait on God when I'm afraid? We've seen that there's two approaches that men have commonly and naturally to themselves. Firstly is the one that is so focused on the past and how the past has hurt them and the pain they have received and the injustice they have borne, that they will naturally rationalize from those events of the past, relive the pain they have suffered in prior times, and use that as a means to respond to their life in the present, to avoid what they do not want to suffer again. There's also the one who would have such specific focus on that future outcome which they desire, which they are convinced would be good for them and maybe even good for you, and therefore they would seek to control these future outcomes in order to achieve the ends which they so carefully desire. In reality, I think men very naturally use both of these methods. But the reality is that no matter which of these methods or both of these methods that you're using, the direct outcome of them, we'd have to all agree, is we do not wait on God. Hosea says that Jacob was practically born into this world knowing what he wanted. From birth, he was grasping his brother by the heel. It looked as though his driven ways were working. It seemed as though anything that he did desire and whatever methods he used to get it were working. And by that, it looked like he had power with God. But that was really an illusion. None of us have power over God. And that same Jacob was shown this when he is broken down into tears as his hip is out of joint. And he besought God. And he found God at Bethel when he put away those false forms of trust. Put away all idolatry, physical idols, spiritual idols. Put away those things that have no power. And he was obedient despite fear of reprisals. Hosea says that God became his memorial. Jacob was famous for setting up memorials, wasn't he? He set up a memorial at Bethel. He set up a memorial at Rachel's gravesite. He set up a memorial with Laban, didn't he? Jacob was very good at erecting memorials. Hosea says God became his memorial. So Hosea exhorts his own people, and he exhorts us, that if even Jacob could learn to trust and obey, that we could do the same. And the evidence, brothers and sisters, that we do trust, the evidence that we trust God, is that we will keep mercy and judgment. We keep mercy when we want to justify ourselves with blame. And we keep judgment, we want to justify ourselves via the ends we want to achieve. But I tell you what, if you are willing to forgive others of the way they've hurt you, and you are willing to act with judgment and justice when tempted to control the event to your own ends, then you will need to be in a situation where you wait on God, because you will not be in a situation where you are controlling events for your own ends. So as Jacob left Bethel, he has a series of unfortunate and painful things happen to him. Deborah dies, and Rachel dies, and Reuben betrays him, and Joseph is killed, and Isaac dies, and there's famine. It's in the midst of these tragedies that Jacob would be consumed over the next 22 years. Now, all these tragedies are poignant, and any of these we could look at and find exhortation to understand Jacob better. But perhaps the one, well, definitely the one, which the scriptures give us the most detail about, is the incident of Joseph. Now, you know the story, so I'm not going to spend too much time on the details here. It would be clear, I think, to Jacob, after the death of Rachel especially, and the betrayal of Reuben and Simeon and Levi, after his sons revealed themselves for perhaps what they are, what they were at the moment, that Jacob would have naturally turned to Joseph. Now, at Bethel, when he set up the pillar, he promised something. And the thing that he promised was, he said, this pillar is going to become the house of God. So upon coming to Bethel for the second time, I think Jacob would have been consumed with the idea, because of the promise God gave them there, the promise of the land, the promise of a multitude of nations, the promise of resurrection, and the promise of a king, that Jacob would have been consumed with the idea that it was through him that this house of God would be built. And when he looked at his family, and he saw Reuben over there, and he saw Simeon and Levi over there, he would have seen, if I am going to build the house of God, it's going to be through that boy who loves the things of God, who is faithful and honest and true and trustworthy. It's that boy through whom these promises are going to find fulfillment. So he gives Joseph a special priestly coat, and he favors him. And his brothers become jealous. Now, Jacob would have known the dangers of favoritism. In his house growing up, with his mother favoring him and his father favoring, he would have saw the dangers and the evils of that favoritism. But the text doesn't give us some indication that he's concerned about this. Now, remember, looking back at our model that we're talking about, now this is just a model. This is not chapter and verse. This is just me trying to make sense of the idea where Jesus says, take no thought for the morrow. If Jesus is speaking about about Jacob, or alluding to Jacob in these verses, and he says, take no thought for the morrow, I'm immediately struck by the idea that in the life of Jacob, I have to think of things in terms of what's happened, what's going to happen, and what's going on right now. And when I think about this, I think about events and responses and outcomes, it just struck me this might be a useful way to think about how the brothers saw what was happening in their home. Because when the brothers looked at events, what they saw very clearly is that Joseph was the favorite. That's an event. They had no control over that. That happened to them. You could say that happened to them partially because of their actions. Perhaps so. They might not have seen it that way. But nevertheless, the obvious implication of what's going on, and the text tells us, Joseph is the favorite. He gets the priestly coat. They don't like it. Well, as they think about that event, they also then project into the future. Because, there's even dreams to confirm this, but it looks as though Joseph is the favorite. He is given the special coat. Our Father loves him more than he loves us. We can see that the way this thing is going, that Joseph is going to be our ruler. He is going to rule over us. His dream says we're going to bow down to him. Our sheaves bow down to his sheaf. Our star bows down to his star. So the boys then maybe have some options. Thinking then about the model we've been taught about in Hosea. Well, could they keep mercy? This means they've been hurt by their brother, but they're actually going to act with mercy towards that, and they're not going to seek to get revenge. Well, the boys don't opt for that option, right? Well, having not kept mercy, they're holding on to resentment, but I guess there's still the option that they could be just. They could act with justice. They could be hard on themselves and hold themselves out to a sense of duty and right and wrong according to what God's will is, even if they're holding on to the pain. The boys elect for that option? Nope, they don't elect for that option either. They're not willing to show mercy, and they're not willing to keep judgment. So having not chosen the route of mercy regarding their pain, and not choosing the route of judgment regarding their future actions, then what are the odds here, do you think, given that I've rejected both of those options, that I'm going to wait on God? If I reject both keeping mercy and I reject keeping judgment, I am simply not going to wait on God. I'm going to act to change my circumstances to one that is more of my liking. That is the model I'm going to take. Okay? So they're going to be happy to blame, right? We're going to blame Joseph. It's not our fault. It's that schemer. Yeah, see, they're not calling it. It's that dreamer. He's causing it. He's causing our pain. He's causing our distress. He tells on us to Dad. He's telling our Father we're not keeping the sheep very well. We're gonna build up a case. Does anyone have you guys know what I mean by a case? Does anyone have a file in their brain where they're just kind of holding on to certain things? I had one of this when I moved to New Zealand. I had a case against all of you, right? You don't like Americans. You think I'm loud. Why are you laughing? See? You make fun of Starbucks. Right? I had a case against you. It's cold here. My summer feels like winter. It was a case, right? I didn't want to have it, but I was building it, right? Because it would then allow me, with some sense of justice, to act badly. And I did. So, they having blame or they're scheming. So now with the blame set squarely in place, hey, Dad, he's turned us into Dad. He's got these dreams. It's his fault. Now we're going to think, how can I change my circumstances? I don't like where it's going, so I'm going to change it. I don't like this idea that Joseph rules over me. I'm going to do what I can to change it. So we're not going to wait on God. We're going to change our circumstances. And Joseph is sold into slavery. Now, it's just worthwhile thinking about whether the boys got anything they wanted. So often we change our circumstances. We're thinking, if I just get what I want, then I'll be happy. Were the boys happy? Did they get what they wanted? Did Dad start to like them more? Did they get more of his attention? What did they get when they changed their circumstances to the way they wanted things? Who here has ever thought, I'm going to intervene here using a lot of self-will, and I'm going to change things the way I think they should be? And the reality is, they're worse. It's worse. And what they ended up getting is an undescribable guilt. Seeing their father day after day after day after day after day refusing comfort. Imagine going to the old man and him shoving you away. Spending all day in his tent. And you know what you did. How do you feel then? Oh, this is better. They got none of the outcomes they wanted. We read of this in Genesis chapter 37, verse 31 to 33, and then 35. And they took Joseph's coat and killed a kid of the goats and dipped the coat in blood. And they sent the coat of colors, and they brought it to their father and said, "This we have found. Know now whether it be thy son's coat or no." And he knew it, and said, "It is my son's coat. An evil beast hath devoured him. Joseph is without doubt rent in pieces." And all his sons and his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. And he said, For I will go down into the grave unto my son mourning. Thus his father wept for him. We're told that he refused to be comforted. Now, anyone would weep at the thought their child died. My grandma was this way, by the way. My uncle came home one day, worked in a hospital, went into the bathroom, and never came out. My other uncle, Brad, found him, and Grandma never got over it. Never got over the death of her son. It's completely understandable that someone is absolutely and completely distraught at the death of a child. But I think we ought to pay attention to the fact that he refuses comfort. He doesn't want anyone to make him feel better. He doesn't want his boys to make him feel better. Maybe he suspects them, because this is actually quite a lame scheme when you start to analyze the details, right? Which we're not going to. But he even refuses to be comforted by his daughters. They didn't have anything to do with it. He refuses to be comforted by anyone. He pushes them away. He makes a really dreary proclamation that he'd prefer to mourn for Joseph every day for the rest of his life, which was 38 years. He prefers that to comfort. So what does this tell us about Jacob? I think Jacob was someone, and no different than the rest of us, by the way. We're all this way. But someone that really suffered a bit from expectations. I think it suggests that Jacob had a very specific view of the future that he wanted. And in that view of the future, he had Joseph woven through every part of it. You see, in his version of the future, he had plans for Joseph to be the family priest. He had plans probably for Joseph to rule over the family. That's why he's considering what it was when, the boys are angry at the dream, but Jacob considered the dream. He had plans for Joseph to eat with him and cheer him in his old age. He had plans for Joseph to comfort him over the loss of his wife. He had plans for Joseph to be there when he was dying. He had plans for Joseph to help build the house of God that he had promised to God that he would do. See, his plans for Joseph were for here and now, and were for the future, and were for the kingdom. For every part of his future, and every part of the hope he had for the future. So when he believes Joseph is dead, it really isn't just a tragedy because he loved the boy. It's like the whole fabric of his hope, his existence, and of his being was tied up with this child. See, without Joseph, it felt like every day lacked purpose. It felt like every day lacked hope. Without purpose and without hope, how are you supposed to find comfort? You can't be comforted with empty phrases like, oh, it's okay, it's going to be all right. Because you know it's not going to be all right. It can't be all right. Because the version of the future that you had been building your whole life on involved that boy. And you know that no version of the future is better than the one you had been planning. Do you see this? Do you see this? And so he refuses comforts. He can't be comforted. When we know exactly what we want from the future, how we want it to go, in meditative detail, our little plans and designs, when our hope is not in the promises, but maybe in our specific interpretation of how God's going to deliver those promises for us, then we're no longer in surrender. We're into scheming. We're into how can I get what I want? We have an expected outcome, not a hope in God's will, not a trust in God's faithfulness. We have a very specific and certain outcome that we want. So we're no longer concerned or as concerned with the appropriateness and the faithfulness of our actions, but with how those actions relate or don't relate to the future we're trying to create. On this ground, by the way, we can justify favoritism. Why can we justify favoritism? Because based on the future I expect, he deserves to be favored. That's how. If the future is going to turn out the way I think it's going to turn out, if it goes the way I think it's going to go, if it goes the way I'm plotting it to go, then he deserves to be favored. He deserves my bias. Why? Because the future is going to turn out this way, and if the future is going to turn out this way, then it's completely just. Well, how do you explain that to your other sons? Will it appear justice to them? Will it appear to them that really you are keeping judgment? So Jacob's favoritism, which was actually perfectly in line with where he thought the future was going, probably wasn't in keeping judgment for the here and now. It wouldn't have been interpreted by the other sons as justice. But in line of the future he expected, perfectly reasonable. So we can look at Joseph being sold into slavery and we can blame the sons, and the sons appeared to deserve a lot of blame. But it was actually through their sin that God was working to perfect Jacob's faith, really. Jacob needed something to change him. He would need to learn a new and greater faith and awe of God. That God would bring about all of Jacob's desires in a way completely and totally out of Jacob's control. I mean, what needs to happen is that scheming needs to turn to trust, and expected outcomes need to turn to God's will. Jacob will confess at the end of his life I have waited on thy salvation, O God. Jacob needs to be brought to the place where he learns to wait on God's salvation. That God alone has power, control, and glory. It is God who strives. It is for us to wait patiently and faithfully for what he reveals. So can you see, brothers and sisters, that what's happening to Joseph, as awful as it is, it was for Jacob. At least in part, because God is working with Judah, he's working with all the brethren, but he's certainly working with Jacob through this. So the next thing we're told in Scripture about Jacob is found in Genesis 42, when Jacob says to his sons, now when Jacob saw that there was corn in Egypt, Jacob said to his sons, why do you look upon one another? And he said, behold, I have heard that there is corn in Egypt. Get you down thither and buy for us from thence, that we may live and not die. Now, you ever been in a study, brothers and sisters, where you sort of think that you see things because you're so into the way that you see it, that you just start reading it into everything? You ever been in a study, and no matter what the readings are for the day, you see your theme of your study pop through, right? And you're thinking, I kind of felt this way as I was reading this, because this is a statement that I think is just so consistent with Jacob's natural way of seeing things. It's as if Jacob's saying is, I can see where this is going, and I don't like it. I can see something needs to be done, even if you numbskulls haven't figured it out yet. I'll provide you the way we need to respond to improve the outcome that we really want to achieve here. And we're told a few verses later that Jacob would not send Benjamin, for he feared the harm that might befall him. In fact, in Genesis chapter 44 and verse 30, Judah will say that Jacob's life is bound up in the life of the lad. In Genesis 42, the brothers come back without Simeon, and their money repaid into their sacks, and Jacob is dismayed. And we read there, starting in verse 36, and Jacob their father said unto them, me have ye bereaved of my children. People read that statement, by the way, as Jacob really understanding that the brothers were behind the death of Joseph. But nevertheless, me have ye bereaved of my children. Joseph is not. Simeon is not. And ye will take Benjamin away. All these things are against me. And Reuben spake unto his father, saying, slay my two sons if I bring him not to thee. Deliver him into my hand, and I will bring him to thee again. And Jacob said, my son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he is left alone. If mischief befall him by the way in which ye go, then shall ye bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to the grave. Now, I just want to analyze how Jacob is making decisions here. Okay? Because whatever's going on here, this is not surrender. So really, Jacob is speaking within 3 time periods. You probably pick up on this, right? We have past, present, and future. The first statement is, me have ye bereaved. He's recalling the past. So the framework there is blame. You have bereaved me. I'm now making a decision. But before I make a decision, I'm first going to relive the pain of the past. And I'm going to filter my decision for the present through the pain of the past. Then he says, my son shall not go down with you. That's the present. I'm going to control my circumstances to avoid the pain I felt before. And then now he says, if mischief befallen by the way, that's the future. So now what he's doing is he's projecting the pain of the past into the future. Do you guys see that there's a framework here for making a decision? I have to make a tough decision. The first thing I do is recall my pain. The next thing I do is make a decision on the present for control. The third thing I do is justify that decision by projecting the pain into the future. Now, this is a very normal way of thinking. Everyone who has flesh has thought this way. I'm not even criticizing Jacob for thinking this way. All I'm saying is that this has not led to a faithful response. Is that we make decisions in the present based on the pain of the past and projecting that pain into the future. And then come back to the present. Because the reality of this decision is what? The family stays hungry. That's what's the outcome here. You know. In fact, you can sort of go through the facts here. The family is hungry. That's a fact. Okay? So the implication of the fact is that we actually need to send Benjamin to Egypt. Because that's a requirement to go get corn. However, I'm going to look to the past. I'm going to blame others. I'm going to relive the loss and the pain of that. I'm going to use that to rationalize an action, control, and I'm going to refuse to send Benjamin. Then I'm going to look to the future to justify that decision by projecting the pain into the future. And the reality is, the family stays hungry. Have you ever made a decision like this? This is the way we make decisions, isn't it? This is the way we make decisions unless the trust of God is somehow brought into the circumstances. Just notice the emphasis on the pronouns here. Genesis 42, verse 36 to 38 again. And Jacob their father said unto them, Me have ye bereaved of my children. Joseph is not, Simeon is not, and ye will take Benjamin away. All these things are against me. If mischief have fallen by the way which ye go, then ye shall bring my gray hairs with sorrow to the grave. Look at that phrase, all these things are against me. I just thought it was interesting to look at that in a couple different versions. The CSB, everything happens to me. NIV, everything's against me. Young's literal, against me have been all these. NLT, everything is going against me. This is just a bit of an insight into Jacob's frame of mind here. Because what is happening is he's looking at all the circumstances that have happened in his life, especially over the last several years. He's looking at deaths, he's looking at famine, he's looking at the loss of his son, and he interprets all those things as being specifically against him. This is not an attitude of surrender. This is an attitude of defense. This is not an attitude of acceptance. I'm not accepting the facts. I'm fighting the facts here. This is against what do I have to do to pivot to avoid getting hurt anymore? Now, this is in chapter 42, but just notice what he's going to say a couple chapters later, not very long in time. End of his life. God which fed me all my life long unto this day, the angel which redeemed me from all evil, bless the lads. So clearly we can see something has to happen. He's got to move from everything is against me to saying that. Well, that's really the remainder of our study. How do we move from here to there? Because that's where he moves. He goes from everything is against me to actually the angel was there the whole time feeding me. The angel was there the whole time redeeming me. The angel redeemed me not from this evil, that evil, that evil. The angel redeemed me from all evil. That's quite a shift. That's going to happen at the very end of his life. I mean, I feel like I'm in the middle of life right now. Did you know that hymn we sing that talks about the spring and the summer and the fall and the winter? It just occurred to me that I might break it up into 20s. The first 20 years is spring, the next 20 years is summer, the next 20 years is fall, the last 20 years is winter. I thought based on that framework, I've just entered the fall. And that was a scary thought. But even for those that might be in the winter of life, what a shift in thinking in the very end of your life. And that's what happens. So that's the story of the rest of Jacob's life here. Okay? Now, Jacob doesn't have the help of the rest of the Old Testament that we have, because we know that when God afflicts faithfully. And God is actually being very faithful right now in the life of Jacob, although he can't perceive it. We have the comfort of words like Psalm 119, verse 75. I know, O Yahweh, that thy judgments are right, and that thou in faithfulness hast afflicted me. Or Proverbs chapter 3, verse 12. For whom the Lord loveth, he correcteth, even as a father the son in whom he delighteth. Or Revelation chapter 3, verse 19. For as many as I love, I rebuke and chasten. Be zealous, therefore, and repent. So we have the comfort of these words. Jacob didn't have the comfort of these words. We have the experience of men of faith written down for us in the Word. Jacob didn't have that experience other than what has been told him from his fathers. So I don't want to be critical of Jacob unnecessarily. But he did interpret all these things that they were against him. Circumstances were not his helper. He didn't see his trials as faithful. He didn't see it as love. He saw it as against. In other words, Jacob, at this point in his life, he's wrestling, isn't he? That's what he's doing. Jacob is wrestling. Now, the first glimpse that we get into the change here is when Jacob responds to his son Judah. In Genesis chapter 43, verse 6 and 7, we read this. And Israel said, interesting the change of name, wherefore dealt ye so ill with me, as to tell the man whether ye had yet a brother? Again, it's sort of interpreted as something that's happening to him. Now look at the brother's response is to say, how are we to know? He asked us questions. We gave him answers. How could we know that he was going to say, yeah, send your brother next time? Now, when the brothers are, when they are asked about this to Jacob, they get defensive too. Hey, don't blame us. We didn't know. Right? And Judah really stands differently. And this is look at the pronouns perhaps in Judah's response. And Judah said to Israel his father, send the lad with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die, both we and thou, and also our little ones. I will be surety for him. Of my hand thou shalt require him, if I bring him not unto thee, to set him before thee. Then let me bear the blame forever, except we had lingered, surely now we had returned the second time. Do you see the beauty of Judah's response? See, Jacob was looking back in pain and looking at his losses and projecting that pain forward. All his decision-making is based on self. None of his decision-making thus far has mentioned God. The result is that the family's hungry. Judah's brothers, in essence, respond by saying, hey, it's not our fault. And Judah responds by putting the family before himself. He reminds Jacob that sending Benjamin is best for everyone. He puts Benjamin and his father above himself. And in this way, he acted in the exact opposite manner of Jacob and of the brethren. And so Jacob changes based on this. See the response of Jacob here. And their father Israel said unto them, if it must be so now, do this. Take of the best fruits in the land in your vessels, and carry down the man a present, a little balm, a little honey, spices, myrrh, nuts, and almonds. Take double money in your hand, and the money that was brought again in the mouth of your sacks. Carry it again in your hand. Peradventure it was an oversight. Take also your brother, and arise and go again unto the man. And for the very first time, he mentions God. And God Almighty give you mercy before the man, that he may send away your other brother and Benjamin. And if I be bereaved of my children, I am bereaved. So I just want you to observe, just for a moment, just observe this. As soon as Jacob stops fighting the facts, he involves God in his thinking. Do you guys see that? Just pause for a moment. I want you to observe that. As soon as he stops fighting the facts, as soon as he moves to acceptance, then he can bring God into his thinking. Why he's fighting the facts, why he's fighting the circumstances, why he's putting up a defense, he does not involve God in his thinking or thought process. And if there's something right now that you're fighting, and you're putting up a defense, and you're putting up a shield, then how can you properly bring God into it? Because obviously you must have concluded that whatever's happening to you must be outside of God's care. Or else that God's made a mistake that it's happened to you. But when we move to acceptance, suddenly, almost magically, we can move to a place where now we can bring God into this. And Jacob does. So I just want to summarize this for a moment. Okay? Jacob refuses to be comforted and accept Joseph's death. Jacob shows signs he lost hope of angelic care, believing that everything is against him. He blames his sons that Benjamin is required in Egypt. He fearfully expects Benjamin's demise if he takes the journey. You see how this is the thinking of the flesh? All this is causing him to selfishly put his feelings above his family's needs. He is fighting the facts, trying to control a fear-based outcome. He has effectively stopped waiting on God. We just observe that? Judas shows Jacob the opposite spirit by accepting events and putting others before himself. Seeing that spirit, Jacob relents and calls on God's mercy. So I know it's a little bit simplistic, but I think if we could just see the order of that, it makes it so clear where Jacob is at when he's making this decision. So Jacob is compelled, almost against his will and all his instinctual desire, to trust God. I want you to envision Jacob. I want you to see him staring at a dusty horizon. I want you to kind of see Jacob watching the caravan with his sons and with Benjamin slowly disappear on the horizon, getting smaller and smaller and smaller until it's gone. The matter was out of his hands, finally and completely. Now I want you to think about that same Jacob, and staring at the horizon, he figures they'll be gone for so long. They're gone for so long, they're not back. Where's Jacob? He's over there looking at the horizon. He keeps on staring at the south. Day after day, looking at the horizon, looking for the caravan, trying to find any word, any message, any comfort that they might be home. They are delayed. Why are they delayed? Then one day he sees something. Could it be them? No, it can't be. No, the caravan's too large. But they're coming towards his camp. There's too many carts. There's too many animals carrying packs. But they're coming straight for him. What could this mean? Are those his sons? And they're getting closer. And Jacob starts to scan the outline of the company. Where's Benjamin? Where's Benjamin? Where's Benjamin? Where's Benjamin? And then just faintly, he sees him. And he thanks God because he thinks that's the answer to his prayer. He's been praying about this. He's been invoking God's goodness. He's been asking for God's mercy. He's been in prayer for his boy and for his sons. And Benjamin back is all he hoped. That's all he hoped for. All that Jacob had prayed for, and all he had hoped for, was that the safe return of his son. And then when he gets there, we're told in Genesis 45, verses 26 to 28, and they told him, saying, Joseph is yet alive, and he is governor over all the land of Egypt. And Jacob's heart fainted, for he believed them not. And they told him all the words of Joseph. And he said to them, when he saw the wagons which Joseph had sent to carry him, the spirit of Jacob their father revived. And Israel said, it is enough. Joseph, my son, is yet alive. I will go and see him before I die. Now, can you picture Jacob at that moment? Trying to make sense of all this in his head? Trying to reconcile all the information at once? He couldn't believe it. Of course he couldn't. He spent 22 years refusing to be comforted. And again, he wanted to deny the evidence right in front of him. He didn't want. There's a part of our heart. Once we've been hurt there, we close that part of our heart. We are not going to open it again. We are not going to suffer ourselves to be hurt again. No, not again. No, not again. And even to fathom the idea that Joseph was alive would be to open up that part. And so what do you know what happens when we've been hurt? Is that we will look for every bit of evidence in order to stay being hurt. You know that you do it. I do it too. Once we've been hurt, we will try to find evidence in order to stay being hurt. Once the ecclesia has hurt us, we will scan the ecclesia trying to find any person that has hurt us. And we'll believe that they will. And when we're told, no, that sister didn't intend that. That wasn't a slight. That had nothing to do with you. No. It was intentional. She did it on purpose. I saw the way she looked at me. No, that exhortation had nothing to do with you. Oh, no. He was speaking directly to me, the hypocrite. Who does he think he is? And what you do is two things. You interpret all information negatively, and you make it all about yourself. It's not about you. And so Jacob has evidence of 11 boys telling him Joseph is alive, and he won't believe it. And if you've been hurt, you will deny the truth of the circumstances in order to stay hurt. Because that allows you to keep your heart closed. Until Jacob is pressed with overwhelming evidence that Joseph is alive and his spirit revives. See, God had done for him what he could not control. God had done for him what he could not believe, what he could not even wish for. God had done more for Jacob than he even wanted for himself. This God that he had just started to invoke in prayer, once the situation was wrenched out of his hands, once he had no other option but to accept the circumstances, that God had wrought a miracle. And it wasn't a miracle of the moment. It was a miracle that had been building over decades. See, the whole time that Jacob thought God was against him, God was striving and doing something bigger than him. And Jacob is saying, me. Jacob, this is bigger than you. So the thing that he had fought against had become the key to open the door to everything he ever wanted. The thing that he was afraid of had been the key to his salvation. And where is the key of your heart closed right now? Where are you denying the truth of the situation because you will refuse to be hurt again? So I will deny the truth. I will interpret everything through the lens of my own selfishness. And I will keep on being hurt because I like being hurt. I've been there. I've been there with my wife. I've been there with you all. And maybe, just maybe, the thing you're fighting against, it's bigger than you. And accepting and believing is the key to opening up everything that you really want. Maybe just that acceptance is the difference to your spirit reviving. So what are our principles for surrender? Our expectations for the future can easily lead to scheming. And once we're into scheming, we will inevitably have control and injustice. If we place our hopes on a very specific future, we can interpret in our grief that everything, including God, is against us. Believing God is against us leads us to interpret facts with fear, make decisions based on a distorted view of the future, and invoke blame. In such a state, a faithful response is very difficult. Our expectations not working out is no sign that God isn't working or is against us. God is found when we stop fighting facts, learn again to trust, and invoke God's mercy to act faithfully, 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 faithfully.